The warm afternoon sun spilled through tall French windows, casting golden ribbons across the polished herringbone floor of the dressing room. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, and the faint scent of jasmine lingered from a nearby bouquet. The room was quiet, but alive with presence. Plush velvet seating, a brass clothing rack draped with silk, and a large, ornate mirror that stood like a sentinel at the far wall. Elena stood before it, her bare feet sinking slightly into the rug, below her silhouette tall and composed. In her early 50s, her skin held the stories of sunlit summers and quiet heartbreaks. She wore a lingerie set in deep emerald green. Lace sculpted around her form like ivy clinging to marble, the fabric catching light in delicate flashes. The bra framed her with elegance, the high-waisted lace panty hugging her with dignity and quiet sensuality. She tilted her head slightly, studying her reflection. There was no urgency in her gaze, no critique, only appreciation. She adjusted a strap, smoothing the edge along her shoulder with fingers that moved gently, reverently. Her expression wasn't one of seeking approval, it was of recognition. This was her body, her age, her moment. Behind her, the dressing room door creaked open. Mireille entered with a soft rustle of silk, her robe the shade of forest moss and trimmed with hand-sewn detailing. In her late 60s, she carried herself like a woman who had danced with both grief and joy and made peace with both. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a loose chignon, and her eyes sparkled as she watched Elena in the mirror. "That color was made for you," Mireille said, her voice low and smooth, touched with a Parisian accent that had grown softer, with time. Elena smiled, turning slightly to face her. "No," she replied, her voice rich and warm. "We were made for this." The two women held each other's gaze, not needing more words. It was a communion of sorts, a shared understanding of how far they'd come, how much they had reclaimed. The lingerie wasn't just adornment, it was declaration. Proof that Allure did not fade, it evolved. They both laughed, soft and real, like the rustling of satin, and the room seemed to exhale with them. Twilight descended upon the garden like a velvet curtain, soft and slow, wrapping the evening in dusky purples and burnished gold. Ivy-laced lanterns swayed gently in the warm summer breeze, casting honeyed light over rose bushes in full bloom. The scent of earth, petals, and something, faintly citrus, hung in the air. A vintage gramophone crooned a smoky jazz melody from a corner table, and laughter wove like ribbon through the garden's open pathways. Guests, an eclectic blend of artists, writers, old friends, and a few new curious souls, mingled beneath. Olive trees strung with fairy lights, linen-draped tables dotted the lawn, adorned with wildflower arrangements and delicate glassware. The atmosphere was easy, electric in its intimacy. Elena and Mireille stepped through the arched stone gate that opened onto the garden. Their arrival was quiet, but it stirred the crowd like a whispered poem. Elena wore a sheer sage-green shawl. Draped across her shoulders, the deep emerald of her lingerie subtly visible beneath. The silk hugged her like a secret, one she was unafraid to share. Mireille, regal in a floor-length robe of green-gray silk left slightly open at the front, revealed glimpses of intricate lacework that shimmered with each graceful step. They walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but intention. Eyes followed them, not with judgment, but reverence. There was something magnetic in their ease. No tension, no need to impress. Just the simple, unapologetic beauty of two women at home in their skin. At a nearby table, a group of younger guests paused their conversation. One, a woman in her late 20s with short copper hair and wide eyes, leaned forward slightly, captivated. "You both look breathtaking," she said with the hesitance of someone unsure if admiration would be welcome. "What's your secret?" Mireille glanced at Elena with an amused tilt of her head before lifting her wine glass. "Time," she said with a smile, her voice smooth as velvet. "And learning to love every part of ourselves." Elena added without missing a beat, "Confidence is the finest lingerie, but green silk certainly helps." The small group laughed, and the tension melted into admiration and curiosity. A man nearby, an old flame of Elena's from years past, raised his glass from across the garden. She returned the gesture with a slight lift of her chin and a knowing smile that said more than words could. Mireille and Elena took seats under an arbor wrapped in blooming vines. As they sipped their wine and spoke softly, the night seemed to lean in closer as if to listen. There was no rush, no performance, just presence. And in that presence they shone, not like stars begging to be seen, but like the moon, constant, luminous, and utterly undeniable. The garden pulsed gently with music and low voices. Lanterns flickered. And somewhere amid it all, the green silk whispered its own story of women who had stepped into their power, not to be admired but to be seen.